On my quest to play all the Sword Art Online games, Hollow Realisation is probably one of my most anticipated games to play. It was the game I heard the most about, be it from other reviews or viewers, and overall, people were rather positive about it. And the positive experience would be a great way to forget the rather nasty taste that Lost Song left. In the case with Lost Song, I just hoped things would be better than its predecessor, which turned out to be the other way around. Instead of doing things better and continue the previous work, it decided to more or less burn it and start anew. Luck seems to be on my side here, as Sword Art Online Hollow Realisation is developed by the same studio that did Hollow Fragment. A game that I really enjoyed and wished Lost Song used as its foundation, but instead, Hollow Realisation uses it. In other words, I actually had a hopeful outlook towards Hollow Realisation and even to the series itself, as with the same people behind the next installment will offer the series an opportunity to develop, improve and change instead of crash and burn. But nothing is guaranteed, so let's see if they took this opportunity and created another but better and more importantly fun Sword Art Online game. This is Sword Art Online Hollow Realisation. Sword Art Online Hollow Realisation takes place in the alternative timeline of the Sword Art Online series and continues the story right from where Lost Song ended. The world of VR is still shaken by the events of the death game known as Sword Art Online. The fear that is the result of those events gave VR such a bad name that it is almost pushed to the brink of cancellation. However, some still want to show the good of VR and the possibilities it has. Therefore, together with the government, Sword Art Origins is created. Another VR game that is highly regulated and protected to avoid a terrible repeat from events that came before. Kirito and gang left the fairy world of Alfheim Online behind to join the beta test of Sword Art Origins, which, as the name suggests, is the origin game to the once death game known as Sword Art Online. The game even uses the original Sword Art Online game code and design as its foundation. So basically it's just a whole asset flip, but slightly different and better, because you're not stuck in it nor do you die in real life when your HP hits 0. Not long after Kirito and gang joined the beta, mysterious things start to happen. Kirito gets a weird, eerie message from a mysterious person, only to then run into a weird NPC who offers a unique but unknown quest. Does these events happen because this is a beta test? Does it happen because the game uses code from the death game, or is it just all weird coincidence? Those questions and more are asked, explored and uncovered by our heroes. Sword Art Online always knows how to set up a great story premise. And Hollow Realisation is no exception to it. In fact, it's my favorite so far. While I love the story premise of a death game from the first game, I find Hollow Realisation's story premise more interesting, as you get to see the effects of the past and the influence it has on the current events. These characters survived a death game, and now only after a short period of time, they go back to a very similar world that represents that death game. But this time for fun. They will again go to places and a world they recognize and have terrible memories of. And on top of that, the beta is acting up here and there, which have unseen consequences, which should totally push them further into fears of the past, but also create a very interesting challenge to overcome those fears. But this is the moment where I will sound like a broken record. Sword Art Online is great in setting up good story premises, but unfortunately for itself, it's also very good at ruining them. Yet, Hollow Realisation is an exception to this rule, to a certain degree. The previous games also introduced nice story premises, but instead of using that potential, they replaced it with harem stuff that revolves around Kirito and his gang. The harem stuff is still in the game as well, but it's not there to replace or ruin anything. Far from it even. The story actually sets something up, develops that, and then brings that to a completion. What the story especially did well was make a good connection to the death game Sword Art Online. It's called Sword Art Origin in game after all. The origin story of how the world was before it became a flying 100-floor castle. Again, this connection to the death game actually affected the characters at the start. Unfortunately not to a great extent, but at least they acknowledged being troubled with their return throughout the whole game. The story doesn't fully depend on its past though. It actually manages to create an interesting plot when moving forward that involves topics I could and would like to talk about more after this video, as it involves certain ideals and philosophies that I find very interesting. But that is for another time. Don't get the wrong idea though, the story itself is still very simple and straightforward, but for a Sword Art Online story it was alright and I was pleasantly surprised by it. Especially by the fact that it sets something up and does follow it up instead of replacing it with the usual harem stuff. But as I said, the harem stuff and overall interaction with the group is not gone. In fact, there's a lot of it here. In the story you follow Kirito, who is the biggest, best Chad of a gamer you will ever see. Over the last 2 games he gathered a lot of friends on his adventure, or well, friends, depends on who you ask. Kirito's closest friends call his friends mostly a fan group, as most of his friends are girls that have a mad crush on him. However, he is completely clueless to that fact, which leads to a lot of fun interactions. In the previous game, interactions were disappointing. There were not a lot of them, topics and side stories were weak or uninteresting, every character felt very separated from the group, and the group itself rarely interacted. Hollow Realisation is the complete opposite to all these points. There is plenty of character interaction, and the side stories you unfold with these characters is for the most part either fun or interesting. But more importantly, it develops the characters. Even though we are at the 3rd game into the series, characters are still introduced as stereotypes. Yet, just like with the first game, the more you interact with them, the more they move away from that. Characters finally reflect on things that happened. For example, that they return to a game that once was a nightmare for them. They even go a layer deeper and discuss things they did with you in Hollow Fragment. It created this nice connection to the previous games and events, which was something that I really could appreciate. Side stories with these characters are divided into 2 types. You got personal side stories, which you explore in parts as the story progresses. In these side stories, a main topic is picked, like studying for an exam in the real world or exploring a long quest in the game. These side stories focuses on one character, but as the story progresses, more members of the group become involved with it. The other type of side story I like to call the one-off side stories, which start and complete a side story in just one event. These usually involve 2 characters on a quest, or having a discussion, or just hanging out together. These side stories are very relaxing compared to the personal side stories, as these are not story heavy or anything. It's usually about just having fun. Interactions brought these characters and the overall group to life and actually made it feel like these characters lived a life outside of the events that I, the player, witnessed. In the previous games, it truly felt like everything just resolved around me. But here, characters talk about things that they did before together, or you meet them while they themselves are doing things with one another. The friendship between characters in the group took the spotlight from time to time as well, which was great. It felt natural and was fun to hear about. These characters were playing the game even if I wasn't there, which really sold the idea that this game takes place in an MMO. Every time I saw I could interact with characters, it created anticipation and curiosity again and again, as I just wanted to know what they were up to or how they were doing. Of course, the more you interact with these characters, the closer you become with them, and thankfully, Hollow Realization brought back the dating element, meaning that you will be rewarded for putting time and effort into your relationship with these characters. They even added a new element to the dating part, which is that you can take your favorite Sword Art Online girl out for a date. This is fun, especially at the start. It can get repetitive over time, but do not forget the goal that you have in mind, and that is that you want to get these young girls into your... What I meant to say was that once you achieve BFF status with them, you do get a personal event with them, which is just very cute and sweet. The whole story is presented as a visual novel. Just like with the previous games, all the lines are well voice acted by the original cast. This is, for fans, still a really nice touch, as despite the fact that this is an alternative story, the characters are still the same people. Presentation-wise, this story is presented very well, but it comes with a slight problem, and that is its pacing. Whenever you move the main story forward, you unlock side stories. Originally, just like I did in Hollow Fragment, I decided to do first all the side stories before continuing the main story. This worked well at the start, but here there are significantly more side stories than in Hollow Fragment. And before I knew it, they started to pile up, overshadowing the main story completely. Normally, I wouldn't actually mind this, as Sword Art Online stories never follow up their premise. Therefore, being distracted from a wasted potential story via character interaction was something I considered to be good. Yet, this time it actually followed up on its story premise, and I wanted to enjoy it as much as possible. Meaning that for me to have a good main story pacing, I sometimes had to skip some side stories. The length of a side story visual novel cutscene can vary from 5 to 30 minutes long. You don't know the length of them going into them, so with a bit of bad luck, you might be going through 2 to 3 hours of side stories, which just overshadowed the main story, which I wanted to stay connected to and immersed in. Luckily, the game doesn't punish you for creating your own pacing, and I highly recommend finding the pace that suits you the best if you want to play this game. Eventually, my pacing settled with 1 story mission and then 3 to 4 side stories. But don't fear you're missing out on something, as once you completed the game, you can still complete these side stories afterwards. But not all time is spent in this game following the story and dating your Sword Art Online waifu. You also go on adventures with them and fight through the game with a new yet very familiar combat system. But before I start about the combat, if you want to play this game, play it with a controller. Do not try this on the keyboard. It's terrible and the game was not designed for it. I started off playing this game on the keyboard, and I would only recommend using a keyboard and mouse to those that are hell-bent on having a bad time playing this game. So again, if you want to enjoy this game, play it with a controller. Switching to controller still requires some getting used to, however. The combat is actually very familiar in terms of controls to Hollow Fragment, which I played on the PlayStation 4, so adapting to it wasn't hard for me. But if you haven't, I highly recommend taking your time to learn the controls. The combat itself mixes the controls and the base idea of Hollow Fragment's combat, but with the speed and skill design of Lost Song, but without the convoluting RPG elements. Those elements are still there, however, but they are used differently and in my opinion, used better. The core gameplay is still hack and slash, where you can combine skills with your partners to create combos. Just like in Hollow Fragment, the combat reminded me of early gameplay of certain MMOs, which is a strength and a weakness. The feeling of this game being a fake MMORPG was also present in the previous games, but here it felt like they really doubled down a lot on it. On your adventures you see many other players which you can team up with. The city is filled with them and you can hear them talk about anything, be it loot, bosses or plans to hang out. Maybe it's just satire or a very clever joke, but the most realistic MMORPG element in this game is the quest system. Because as you would expect, most quests are kill quests or collect X amount of item quests. A quick reminder, Kirito is again the biggest best chat of a gamer you have ever seen. In Hollow Fragment, that was used as the reason why you were so insanely OP in combat, which in turn ruined it. After that, Lost Song decided to write Kirito as an OP character, but actually put an insane stats gap in the game, turning every enemy in an HP sponge, which also ruined the combat. Here in Hollow Realization, Kirito is not written as an OP character, nor does he have the stats of an OP character. The game offers you a choice of working your way up to become OP, which wasn't too difficult to become. But it did make the combat bearable for the whole game, and at regular intervals very fun. Gear still plays a major role in this game, but was a lot of fun to gain and find on your adventures, as stats are more simplified in this game than in its predecessor. Gear can mainly be obtained by opening chests which are scattered across the whole map. Specifically, the red and blue ones are interesting for loot seekers. They require a little fun challenge or a boss battle before you can open them. The battles themselves might not be super exciting, but opening a chest and having great loot in them was, even till the end of the game. Of all the games that I played so far, the skill tree and leveling system in this game was the weakest one yet. But then again, after Lost Song, I happily take weaker RPG elements, cause by keeping them weak/simple, the combat stayed a lot of fun. Floor bosses are also back in the game and better than before, but this time they are called raid bosses. These are alright fights, a bit of a colorful mess, but still fun. Especially the loot is really nice. Raid bosses come with weaknesses which you can actually target and exploit, which makes a huge difference in comparison to Lost Song, where that was just impossible. Exploiting a raid boss' weaknesses logically makes the fight easier, but more rewarding as well. During these fights you do have to use your command skill a little bit. You have to instruct the raid party to dodge, heal, or full out attack. The fun little system where your partner learns by your commands is also back in the game, and I'm so happy about that. If you give your partner at the right moment a compliment on their action, they will start to perform more of that same action. And this time you can even dabble in a little bit deeper into the system to set up preferences in their actions. The AI is still kinda dumb, but at least this time it was fairly easy to tell them what to do. And when I did, they deleted all enemies in my path. The best part of the combat might be the weirdest, but my most liked part of the game. The combat creates a big disconnection to the character Kirito. In previous installments you play as him, and in this game you do as well. He is after all the main character. However, the part that your character plays as Kirito is so minimal that I would argue that my own created character was the actual main character in this story. I got to make choices for my character, which gear, how he or she looked, who I would hang out with. The only thing that was missing was dialogue choices. But what really drove this point home was that at the start of the game, you start as a nobody, as a level 1. You get to choose if you want to level up, and in what way, with whatever weapon you like, and however you want to look. The journey to become OP might not be long, as the bar is set very low, but at least I got there by playing the game and making my own choices for my character and how he or she was going to be. Being disconnected sounds like a really bad thing, but honestly, it was actually the best thing this game did. It's not always there though, especially in some cutscenes your character still looks like Kirito, and your character still makes predetermined choices as Kirito, which you might find unfitting, dumb, or nonsensical. These moments were particularly frustrating, as it just points out the shortcoming of this game. And in these moments I just wish this game went a couple of steps further with playing your own character in a Sword Art Online story. More visual presentation of my character would have been nice, or again, dialogue choices. Even just cosmetic ones would have been amazing. Still, there was only a handful of these frustrating moments. It just gave me a glimpse of what could have been, and even though it's not a full play your own character experience, what you get to play as your own character just felt fantastic. Sword Art Online Hollow Realization as a game it's alright. It had its moments, but it's not amazing to any extent. For Sword Art Online standards though, it's a pretty good game. I was pleasantly surprised by what it was capable of. The story itself is interesting and touches topics that I could talk about for a long time. But again, that is for another time. The dating element and character interaction overall got improved heavily, and I really enjoyed it. Especially just hanging out with the group. They felt really alive and were doing their things as I was playing the game as well. It's annoying to figure out a good balance between story and gameplay, but once you have it, the game becomes a lot of fun. Combat was alright. If you know what you're doing, it becomes very easy. Yet it did contribute the most to my favorite thing that this game has to offer. I got to create and play my own character in a Sword Art Online story, which as a fan is just a great thing. If you have played the previous games and particularly enjoyed Hollow Fragment, then I definitely recommend checking out Hollow Realization, as it's on many levels an improved version of Hollow Fragment, but also added some nice new things to it as well. If you are a fan of the anime and want to start your adventure in the gaming side of Sword Art Online, then this game is probably a good place to start. It's a more polished game than the games that came before, and you also don't need to fear that you're missing out on the story. At the start of this game, you actually get given a quick refresh on all the important events, so it's a good place to start. And if you're someone that seeks an offline MMORPG experience with dating elements and does not want any complex or deep RPG elements, you might want to keep an eye on this game in case it's on sale. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that if you want to play this game, be sure you get a controller. Do not even attempt to play this on a keyboard. Get a controller, it honestly makes the difference in a good or a bad experience. And that concludes Hollow Realisation. Next game in the series will be Fatal Bullet, which I'm actually looking forward to a lot as well. So be sure to subscribe to be notified for that and other videos, of course. Now with that all being said, I wish you a good day and until next time.